The chair had been sitting on that porch for 365 days. Thaddeus Orrin knew this, because he had counted every single one of them. He had watched the sun rise over the red rock ridgeline to the east and set behind the cottonwood grove to the west, and each evening he had carved a small notch into the arm of that old oak rocking chair with his pocket knife, the same way a prisoner marks time on a cell wall. 365 notches. 365 mornings he had woken before dawn, pulled on his boots, poured himself a black coffee, and walked out onto that porch expecting to see a wagon coming up the dust road. No wagon ever came. But on the 366th morning, something else came instead. It was a rider, and the rider was not her. The rider was a boy of no more than 17, dusty from hard travel, slumped over the neck of a gray mare that looked about ready to collapse. Thaddeus was already standing, coffee cup raised halfway to his lips, when the boy nearly fell out of the saddle and grabbed the porch railing with both hands. "You Thaddeus Orrin," the boy gasped. "I am," Thaddeus said, setting the cup down slowly. "I got a letter." The boy reached into his coat with trembling fingers and pulled out a folded envelope, crinkled and sweat-stained from days of hard riding. From a woman in Laredo, said to bring it straight to the Orrin cattle ranch outside Calhoun Creek, Texas. Said it was urgent. Said if I didn't put it directly into the hands of Thaddeus Orrin, she'd find me herself, and that scared me worse than anything you'd like to know about. Thaddeus took the envelope. His hands, which had driven posts and pulled calves and stitched wounds and been steady through droughts and floods, were not steady now. He could see her handwriting through the thin paper before he even opened it. He recognized those letters the way you recognize a voice in the dark. The boy was saying something about payment, but Thaddeus had already stopped hearing him. He sat back down in that notched rocking chair and unfolded the letter and read the words she had written. And when he finished reading, he sat very still for a long time, staring at the horizon where the sun was beginning to crack open the eastern sky like a wound. Then he stood up, went inside, and started packing his saddlebags, because now he finally understood why Adelaide Monroe had left without saying goodbye. And now he understood what it was going to cost him to go and bring her home. It had started the way most things in Texas started in the spring of 1878. With cattle, with land, and with a woman who was too complicated and too honest to fit neatly inside the life that had been built around her. Thaddeus Orrin had come to Calhoun Creek 7 years before Adelaide arrived, when he was 22 years old and had nothing to his name except a horse, a rifle, $400 he had borrowed from his uncle in Missouri, and a stubbornness that the people who liked him called determination, and the people who didn't called something considerably less charitable. He had bought 40 acres of scrub land from a man who was leaving Texas in a hurry and not saying why, and over the next 3 years, he had turned it into a working cattle operation through sheer force of labor that sometimes bordered on self-destruction. By 1875, he had 160 acres. By 1877, he had the house. It was a good house. He had built it himself with help from 2 hands he paid fair wages, which was unusual enough in those parts that people talked about it. 3 rooms. A real plank floor, glass windows ordered from San Antonio, and a wide covered porch that faced west so you could watch the sunsets. He had built that porch deliberately wide because he had a picture in his mind, even then, of sitting on it with someone. He just didn't know who the someone was yet. Adelaide Monroe came to Calhoun Creek in March of 1878, and she did not arrive the way people expected women to arrive. She did not come on a stagecoach with her mother. She did not come as a bride or a fiancée or a teacher hired by the schoolhouse board. She came driving her own wagon alone, with a canvas bag of tools on the back seat and a medical satchel on the front seat beside her. And she pulled up in front of the general store and asked Hector Pratt behind the counter where she might find lodging and whether the town had a physician. Hector told her the town did not have a physician. The last one had moved on to El Paso 2 years prior. Adelaide Monroe said, "Good. Then I would like to rent a room and tomorrow I will begin seeing patients." Hector stared at her. She was 24 years old, dark-haired, lean from hard travel, wearing a practical brown dress that had seen better days and boots that meant business. Her eyes were the kind of gray-green that shifts depending on the light, and her expression was the kind that dares you to say what you're thinking. Hector did not say what he was thinking. He gave her the room at the back of the boarding house that Mrs. Calloway rented to traveling salesmen and the occasional wandering preacher. And by the following week, Adelaide Monroe had seen 11 patients, stitched 3 wounds, lanced 2 infected injuries, and diagnosed a child's fever that 2 other people in the county had already mistakenly called a death sentence. The child lived. After that, the town of Calhoun Creek stopped questioning Adelaide Monroe's credentials and started simply calling her Doc Adelaide, which she accepted without visible emotion, but which, if you looked carefully, seemed to please her. Thaddeus met her 6 weeks after she arrived, because one of his ranch hands, a quiet man named Ezra who had been with him since the 2nd year, got a bad cut from a piece of broken fence wire that wouldn't stop bleeding. Thaddeus drove Ezra into town himself. He sat in the small waiting room of Adelaide's office, which was really just the front parlor of Mrs. Calloway's boarding house, and he turned his hat in his hands and listened to Ezra making very little sound from behind the closed door, which told him Ezra was in more pain than he let on, because Ezra was the kind of man who didn't make sounds. When Adelaide came out 40 minutes later, she had blood on her apron and an efficient expression, and she told Thaddeus that his man had needed 12 stitches and should not use that hand for 2 weeks or the sutures would pull. 2 weeks, Thaddeus said. That's a problem. I've got the spring roundup starting in 10 days. That is indeed a problem, Adelaide said, but it is not as large a problem as an infected hand which can become a problem from which your man does not recover. So 2 weeks. Thaddeus looked at her for a moment. You're direct, he said. I find it saves time, she said. I appreciate it, he said, and he meant it, and something in the way he said it made her look at him a little more carefully than she had been. He was tall, broad through the shoulders from years of physical work, with dark brown hair that needed cutting and a jaw that was currently wearing several days of stubble. He had blue eyes that were lighter than most, and the kind of steadiness in them that came from having looked at hard things for a long time without looking away. He was not pretty the way some men were pretty. He was the other kind, the kind that gets more interesting the longer you look. 2 weeks, she said again, but her voice had changed almost imperceptibly. Yes, madam, he said. He paid her fairly and he took Ezra home and he thought about her on the drive back in a way that was not entirely appropriate given that he had known her for 20 minutes. He came back to town the following Friday on the pretext of needing supplies. He walked past her office 3 times before going in on the 4th pass, which he recognized even as he was doing it as the kind of ridiculous behavior he would have found contemptible in another man. She was not there. She was out at the Hendricks farm, Mrs. Calloway told him, delivering a baby. He came back the following Friday. This time she was there, sitting at her desk writing in a ledger, and she looked up when he came in and said, "Your man's hand healing properly?" "Yes," he said. "I came to tell you that myself." She set down her pen. "You could have sent word." "I could have," he agreed. She looked at him with that precise, calibrating attention she had and said, "What do you actually want, Mr. Orrin?" He liked that she said it that way. Directly, without games. "I'd like to take you to dinner," he said. "At the hotel, if you're willing." She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "I should tell you something first." "All right," he said. "I'm not looking for what most women in this town are looking for. I'm not looking for a husband to provide for me or a house to settle into. I built something here, a practice, a purpose, and I won't give it up for anyone." "I'm not asking you to give up anything," he said. "I'm asking you to have dinner with me." She looked at him for another moment, those shifting green-gray eyes reading something in his face. Then she said, "Friday, 7 o'clock." That was how it began. What followed over the next 8 months was the most alive Thaddeus Orrin had felt in his entire adult life. They were not easy with each other at first, which he respected. Adelaide Monroe did not make herself easily available. She had office hours 6 days a week, and she took them seriously. And she rode out to farms and ranches at all hours for medical emergencies. And she kept books on everything and ordered medical journals from back east and read them in the evenings. She had a fierce, precise mind that she had clearly been told too many times to make less visible. And the fact that she had refused to do that was something that made Thaddeus feel a deep, specific kind of respect. He courted her the way he did everything, with patience and consistency and without pretense. He did not try to impress her with the size of his operation or his plans for expansion. He talked to her the way he talked to Ezra, plainly and honestly, and he listened to her the way he listened to the land, carefully and without interrupting. He brought her things she needed rather than things that were meant to demonstrate his affection. A new surgical kit he had ordered specially from a medical supply house in Houston. A book she had mentioned once in passing. A folded newspaper from Austin with a medical article she hadn't seen. She noticed. She was too intelligent not to notice. By summer, she was coming out to the ranch on Sunday afternoons, ostensibly to check on Ezra's hand, which had long since healed, and then to check on the cattle for the purely practical reason that ranch animals and humans shared certain ailments, and it was useful for her to understand both. At least that was what she said, and Thaddeus never challenged it because she was right, and also because watching her walk through his pastures in that practical brown dress and those serious boots made something in his chest feel settled in a way nothing else ever had. He told her, one evening in late July, sitting on the wide porch he had built with someone in mind, that he had built this porch for someone. "Did you have anyone specific in mind?" she asked, not looking at him, looking at the sunset. "Not then," he said. "I do now." She was quiet for a long time. The sun went fully below the cottonwood line and the sky turned that deep violet orange that Texas does better than anywhere else on earth. Then she said quietly, "Thaddeus." "Adelaide." "I'm not simple," she said. "I know," he said. "I come with complications." "Most worthwhile things do," he said. She turned and looked at him then, and whatever she was looking for in his face she seemed to find it, because she reached out and put her hand over his where it rested on the arm of the rocking chair, and that was the beginning of the real thing between them. He kissed her for the first time a week later, standing at the gate of her office in the early evening, and she kissed him back with the same directness she brought to everything else, and it was nothing like the tentative, uncertain kisses of young people who don't yet know what they want. It was the kiss of two people who had both been alone long enough to know exactly what they were reaching for. By autumn of 1878, everyone in Calhoun Creek understood what was happening between Thaddeus Orrin and Doc Adelaide, and opinions on the matter were various. Some approved heartily. Some thought it was a strange match. Old Harlan Webb, who owned the second-largest cattle operation in the county and who had been trying to hire Thaddeus as a business partner for 2 years, said the woman would distract him from the work. Mrs. Calloway, who had grown fond of Adelaide in the way landladies grow fond of reliable, quiet tenants, said she was glad the girl had someone steady because she'd clearly been through something. That last part was more perceptive than most people knew. Adelaide had been through something. But she didn't talk about it, and Thaddeus didn't push. He knew she was from somewhere in Georgia originally, that she had gone to a medical college in Philadelphia that admitted women, which was an unusual and expensive thing to do, and that she had come to Texas alone, and apparently without family connection. There were gaps in what she shared about herself, and he respected those gaps the way he respected a fence line. You don't climb over someone else's fence without being invited. What he did not know, in those golden autumn months of 1878, was that those gaps were not simply privacy. They were protection. And the thing she was protecting herself from was already moving toward Calhoun Creek, with the slow, inevitable momentum of a debt finally come due. In November, she stayed at the ranch one evening longer than usual because a cold front had come in sharp and sudden, and the road back to town was icy and miserable. He made her supper, which surprised her, because she hadn't expected him to be able to cook, and it was good, which surprised her more. They sat at his kitchen table and talked until midnight in a way they had never quite talked before, the way people talk when the cold outside makes the inside feel necessary and precious. She told him that night about her father, not everything, but some things. That he had been a doctor in Georgia, and she had learned medicine at his knee before she ever went to Philadelphia. That he had died when she was 19. That after Philadelphia, she had worked in a hospital in Cincinnati for 2 years, and then she had left, quickly and without much ceremony, for reasons she described as complicated and which she clearly did not intend to elaborate on. He told her about his uncle in Missouri, about borrowing the $400 and the terror of that, the absolute certainty he had felt that he would not fail and the complete absence of any rational basis for that certainty. "You knew yourself," she said. "I suppose I did," he said. "Do you know yourself, Adelaide?" She looked at him across the table. "Better now than I did," she said. "Being here has helped with that." He reached across the table and took her hand. She looked down at their joined hands and then back up at him. "I want to ask you something," he said. "And I want you to know that there is no wrong answer. I'm not asking because I expect something, I'm asking because I need to." "Ask," she said. "What are you afraid of?" She was quiet for a long time, long enough that he wondered if she would answer at all. "Losing what I built," she said finally. "Losing myself inside someone else. I watched my mother do it. She was brilliant, Thaddeus. She spoke 3 languages and she read everything and she had opinions on things that would have made her remarkable if anyone had been looking. But no one was looking because she was a wife, and that was all anyone saw. And she accepted it. She made herself small. And then she died and there was nothing to mark that she had been anything except someone's wife and someone's mother. And I promised myself when I was 11 years old watching her funeral that I would not do that." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That is the most important thing you've ever told me." "Is it frightening?" she asked with a careful kind of vulnerability underneath the directness. "No," he said. "It's the reason I'm in love with you." The words sat between them in the lamplight. She looked at him, and something in her face cracked open slightly, something carefully maintained and long-standing, and he saw through that crack to something true and tender and a little afraid. "I love you too," she said. "That is somewhat inconvenient." He laughed, genuinely and fully, the kind of laugh that comes from being happy rather than from something being funny, and she laughed too. And it was the first time he had ever heard her laugh freely, without the restraint she usually kept on herself, and it was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard in that house. He did not propose to her that night, though part of him wanted to. He was too careful with her for that. She needed time the way the land needed rain, not forced but waited for, and he had already proven he could wait. December came, and January and February. She came to the ranch on Sundays, and he came to town on Fridays, and sometimes in between, when he could manage it without the ranch suffering. They had a language between them by now, built of shorthand and shared references, and the particular humor of two people who are both fundamentally serious but who trust each other enough to be otherwise. He read to her sometimes on Sunday evenings, sitting on the porch even in the cold, wrapped in blankets, from whatever book she had most recently acquired. She let him, which was an intimacy that wouldn't have looked like one to anyone watching but which was, to both of them, profound. In February, he came in from the north pasture one afternoon to find Ezra waiting for him with an expression that Thaddeus had learned to read as the face of bad news being carefully managed. "Someone in town asking questions about the dock," Ezra said. "What kind of questions?" Thaddeus asked, very still. Man came in on the afternoon stage, well-dressed, from back east somewhere by the sound of him, was asking about a woman, doctor woman, dark hair, gray eyes, asking at the hotel and the general store. What did people tell him? "People are loyal to Doc Adelaide," Ezra said. "They told him they didn't know anyone like that." "Good," Thaddeus said. "But he's still in town," Ezra said. "At the hotel. He paid for a week." Thaddeus rode into Calhoun Creek the next morning. He went first to Adelaide's office. She was with a patient and he waited. When she came out and saw his face, her expression changed immediately, something carefully neutral dropping over her like a curtain. "Someone is in town," he said. "Looking for you." The neutral expression didn't waver, but something behind her eyes moved sharply. "What does he look like?" He described what Ezra had told him. "Well-dressed, Eastern, dark coat." Adelaide was quiet for a very long moment. Then she said, "His name is probably Wendell Ferris." "Who is Wendell Ferris?" She turned away from him and walked to her window and stood looking out at the dusty street. "He is the reason I left Cincinnati," she said, and then she told him the rest of the story, the parts she had left behind the fence line all these months. She had worked at the Cincinnati hospital for 2 years and had been good at it, exceptional in fact, enough so that a senior physician, there named Dr. Corbin Ferris, had noticed her and had decided that she was too valuable to remain a lowly assistant. He had elevated her, given her more responsibilities, vouched for her when other doctors questioned her presence, and she had been grateful until she understood that his patronage was not kindness but possession. He believed he had bought her with his advocacy, that she owed him a debt that he intended to collect in a specific, personal way that she had refused to pay. When she refused, the situation had become ugly. He had tried to destroy her professional reputation with accusations that were false and cruel, and in 1876, perfectly designed to make a woman impossible to defend. She had left Cincinnati before the full weight of whatever he planned could land on her, taking only what she could carry, moving west quickly, eventually landing in Texas, eventually in Calhoun Creek. Wendell Ferris was Corbin Ferris's younger brother. And the well-dressed man asking questions at the hotel was almost certainly him. Thaddeus listened to all of this without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "What does he want?" "His brother is dying," Adelaide said quietly, still looking out the window. "He's been ill for more than a year. I know because a colleague in Cincinnati wrote to me last spring. Corbin Ferris, despite everything he is a brilliant doctor, and he is dying of a kidney disease that is progressing badly, and I know a treatment. I wrote about it in a paper published in a Philadelphia journal last year." She stopped. "Wendell has come to find me and bring me back to save his brother." The silence in the room was dense with things unsaid. "And if you don't go?" Thaddeus asked. "A man dies," she said. "A man who hurt me and tried to ruin me, but still a man. And if you do go?" She turned from the window then and looked at him, and her expression was the most complex thing he had ever seen on a human face. "Then I go back into the place I ran from, into the middle of everything I left behind, and I don't know what I come out as on the other side." He walked to her then, across the small office, and he took her face in his hands carefully, the way you hold something precious and fragile, and he said, "Adelaide, whatever you decide, I will be here." "That's not a small thing to promise," she said. "I know," he said. She closed her eyes. He felt her lean into his hands by the smallest fraction. Then she opened her eyes again, and the decision was already made in them. He could see it. "I have to meet with him," she said. The meeting with Wendell Ferris happened at the hotel that evening. Thaddeus was not present. She had asked him not to be, not from secrecy but from self-respect. This was her past and her decision, and she needed to face it with her own face, not with a man beside her like a shield. He understood that, and he agreed, and he went home to the ranch and sat on the porch in the February cold and waited. He did not sleep that night. The following morning he rode into town before sunrise. Her office was dark. He knocked at the boarding house door. Mrs. Calloway came to it in her nightgown, looking apologetic and uncomfortable, which was a look Thaddeus had never seen on the woman before. "She left early this morning," Mrs. Calloway said. "Before first light. She had her bags. She asked me to tell no one until tomorrow at least." Thaddeus stood very still on that doorstep. "She left no word for me." Mrs. Calloway's apologetic expression deepened. "No, Mr. Orrin, nothing specific, just that she was sorry." He stood there for another moment. The February wind came down the street carrying cold and dust. He looked at the dark window of her office. He thought about those 8 months, the porch, the laughter, the lamplight, the hands reaching across the table, and he thought about the specific physical nature of the absence of a person when the place they occupied is still there, still shaped around them. Then he rode home. And he sat in that rocking chair on that wide porch he had built with someone in mind, and he waited. The first month was the worst. He did not understand it. That was the thing that was hardest. He understood that she had gone to Cincinnati. He understood that she had gone because she felt she had no choice, that the dark past she carried had finally caught up and demanded its due. What he could not understand was why she had not told him herself, why she had left in the night without a word to him specifically, without even a note. He wrote to her. He found out through some careful asking that Wendell Ferris had been booked on the train from San Antonio, which meant she would have gone there first. And a man he trusted who worked the San Antonio depot confirmed that a dark-haired woman traveling alone had indeed boarded the eastbound train with a well-dressed gentleman on the 14th of February, 1879. Valentine's Day. He noted this with the particular bitterness of a man with a sense of irony. He wrote 3 letters to the address of the Cincinnati hospital. None of them were answered. He wrote to a hotel in Cincinnati that he looked up in a directory at the post office. The letter came back unopened. Spring arrived, and the ranch demanded his full attention, which was the mercy of physical labor, the way it fills the hours that would otherwise be filled with nothing good. He drove himself through the work with an intensity that alarmed Ezra, who had been with him long enough to say something. "You'll work yourself to death," Ezra said one evening. "I'm working the ranch," Thaddeus said. "You're not working the ranch." "You're running away from sitting still," Ezra said. Sitting still is when it gets loud. Thaddeus said nothing. Ezra was right, but acknowledging it didn't make the loud parts any quieter. He stopped writing letters in April, not because he had stopped wanting to, but because something in the silence of her non-responses had begun to feel like a different kind of message than he was prepared to receive. He was not ready to understand what that message might be. He was still waiting for a different one. He kept the notches in the chair. One a day, every evening, methodical and quiet, the way a man does things when he needs something to hold onto and hasn't found anything better. In May, a woman at the church social made a careful, kind overture toward him, suggesting perhaps he might take supper with her and her family sometime. He thanked her very graciously and did not go. In June, Old Harlan, Webb brought up the business partnership again over a fence they were discussing, and Thaddeus found himself almost agreeing because business was something to focus on, and then didn't because agreeing to something permanent felt like accepting something he wasn't ready to accept. In July, the rains didn't come when they should have, and he spent 3 weeks managing a drought situation with the herd, moving cattle to the creek pastures, rationing water, the brutal arithmetic of dry Texas summers. He was grateful for the crisis in a way that shamed him slightly. In August, something shifted in him. Not acceptance, not moving on, something more like the settling of a river after the water drops, the contours of the new landscape becoming clear even if you didn't ask for the flood. He began to think, more calmly than before, about why she had left the way she did. She had told him she was afraid of losing herself inside someone else. She had watched her mother become only a wife, only a mother, visible as nothing else. She had built a life in Calhoun Creek that was hers entirely, and then she had fallen in love, and then her past had come back, and she had been faced with a choice that she had apparently decided she had to make alone, without him beside her like a shield. Because if she had come to him and said goodbye, he would have wanted to come with her, and she would have had to refuse him or give in, and either option would have cost her something essential. She had left without saying goodbye, because saying goodbye would have made the leaving harder, and because not saying goodbye was the only way she could protect both of them from a different kind of damage. He understood this in August, sitting on the porch in the warm evening, turning his pocket-knife over in his hands, and understanding it was both better and worse than not understanding. Better because it made her something other than a woman who had simply used him and gone. Worse because it meant she had made a choice that excluded him, deliberately, and he wasn't sure even now what to do with that. The notches kept accumulating in the arm of the rocking chair. He kept sitting in it, every morning with his coffee and later every evening as the light went, watching the road. In September, he received a letter. It was not from Adelaide. It was from a woman named Eleanor Hatch, who identified herself as Adelaide's colleague and friend at the Cincinnati hospital, and who wrote that she was not entirely sure she should be sending this letter, but had decided to do so anyway because someone should know certain things and Adelaide was being stubborn about it. Eleanor Hatch wrote that Adelaide had arrived in Cincinnati in February and had immediately been drawn into a complicated and ugly situation. Dr. Corbin Ferris was dying, but he was also, in his dying, attempting one final act of the particular kind of control he had always exercised over people he considered his. He had told colleagues in Cincinnati that Adelaide Monroe had stolen research from him. The accusation was fabricated entirely from spite and the desperation of a man watching his own end and needing to make something else hurt. But it had complicated things for Adelaide, who was now navigating both the medical treatment she had come to provide and a professional crisis being engineered against her by someone who had nothing left to lose. Alina wrote that Adelaide was managing, but that it was taking everything she had. She had not left. She had not collapsed. She had stood her ground with a precision and intelligence that Alina said she found, frankly, inspiring. But she was alone in a way that was not good for her, and if there was anyone who cared about her, Alina Hatch thought they should know. Thaddeus read the letter 3 times. Then he wrote back to Alina Hatch, thanking her and asking her to please keep him informed. October brought a second letter from Alina. Adelaide was still there. Dr. Ferris was declining rapidly. The accusation against Adelaide was being slowly but definitely dismantled by the truth, which tended to be durable even when it was inconvenient. Adelaide was treating the dying man, Alina wrote, with a professionalism and humanity that nobody had any right to expect from her given what he had done, and it said everything about who she was. "She asks about you," Alina added at the bottom of the letter. She does not ask directly, of course. She mentions Calhoun Creek sometimes in a way that has nothing to do with what we're discussing. I thought you should know that too. He read that last part standing in the yard, and something inside him that had been held very tightly for 8 months loosened by one cautious degree. He kept waiting. November. A hard freeze came early. He lost 4 head of cattle to a fence collapse in the storm that brought it. And he and Ezra spent 2 days in brutal cold repairing the fence and recovering the cattle that could be recovered. There was something almost comfortable about physical misery, the way it required your entire attention and left no room for anything else. He was aware, turning that winter, that people had stopped expecting him to behave differently. The town had long since adjusted to the fact that Doc Adelaide was gone, and Thaddeus Orrin was sitting on his porch, and that was simply the state of things. Nobody pushed him any more about the church social woman or any other suitable arrangement. He had cultivated, without particularly meaning to, a reputation for being a man of a specific and unmovable kind of loyalty, and the county respected that even while privately thinking he was probably a fool. He might have been. He had considered it seriously, in those long evenings, whether what he was doing was dignified patience or embarrassing stubbornness. He concluded eventually that the distinction didn't matter as much as the fact that he had made a promise, out loud, to a woman's face, and he intended to honor it regardless of whether she ever came back to collect on it. December. The year turned toward its end. He sat on the porch on Christmas morning with his coffee and carved the 365th notch into the arm of the chair and looked at the road. Nothing. The dust road ran straight and empty to the horizon. He went inside and made himself a proper Christmas supper, because Ezra had gone to his family in Gonzales, and the 2 other hands had gone home too, and eating poorly on a holiday struck him as an indulgence of a different kind of self-pity. He made a beef roast and potatoes, and he ate it at his kitchen table reading a chapter of a book she had recommended to him, once in passing, that he had finally found and ordered. January. A new year. The 196th notch of the new year, which was his careless way of remembering that the chair had accumulated them. And then the morning of the 366th day, when the boy had come with the letter. He read the letter 3 more times on the ride to San Antonio to catch the train east. Each time he read it, he felt something different. The letter was short. It was the first direct communication he had received from Adelaide Monroe in a full year. It said, "I have been a coward about this, and I am going to stop being one now. Corbin Ferris died 6 weeks ago. The accusation against me is resolved entirely in my favor. I have been offered a position here in Cincinnati that is the kind of position I never imagined anyone offering me, at a hospital where they are doing work that matters enormously. I have not accepted it. I have not refused it either. I have been sitting with it for 6 weeks, which is, I'm told, excessive. I am writing to you from a hotel room I have been paying for with money I saved, and I want to tell you the truth, which is that I left without saying goodbye, because I knew if I looked at your face again in that moment, I would not be able to do what I needed to do, and I needed to do it alone, the way I do everything, the only way I know how. I know this cost you something. I know it cost you a great deal. I am sorry in a way that the word sorry is not adequate to contain. The position in Cincinnati is important. So is Calhoun Creek. So is the Porch if it still exists. I cannot decide this for myself, and I am asking for the first time in my adult life to not be the one who decides alone. If you want to tell me where I stand, I will be at the Hartwell Hotel in Laredo, Texas, until the 15th. I came back west, Thaddeus. That much I knew. He took the train to Laredo. He had never been to Laredo. He had no reason to go before. It was a border city, rougher than Calhoun Creek, with the Rio Grande on one side and the long, flat Texan plain on the other, and a middle strip of commerce and conflict that was everything the borderlands always were. Complicated, layered, built on the convergence of things that did not entirely agree with each other. He arrived on the 13th. He went directly to the Hartwell Hotel, which was a reasonable establishment on the main street, and he asked for Adelaide Monroe. The man at the desk gave him a careful look and said, "I'll send word up." "Can I give her your name?" "Thaddeus Orrin," he said. He sat in the lobby for 8 minutes. He counted. He had his hat in his hands again, turning it the way he always did when waiting for something important, and he made himself stop doing it because it was the kind of nervous gesture that a man of 31 years should have outgrown. Then the stairs came down into the lobby, and Adelaide Monroe was on them, and Thaddeus stood up, and they looked at each other from a distance of about 30 feet across the lobby of the Hartwell Hotel, and for a moment neither of them moved. She was thinner than when he had last seen her. There were shadows under her eyes from a year of difficult things. She was wearing a different dress, a darker blue one he hadn't seen before, and her dark hair was pinned up but less severely than usual, and her gray-green eyes were doing what they did when she was working very hard to contain a strong emotion, which was to look very directly and very still at the thing in question. He crossed the lobby to her. She came the rest of the way down the stairs. They met at the bottom. "You came," she said. Her voice was steady but only just. "You asked me where you stand," he said. "I did." "Then I'll tell you," he said. "You stand exactly where you have always stood, which is in the middle of my life. That did not change while you were gone. If you thought it would, you were wrong." He put his arms around her and held her back firmly and completely, and felt the tension go out of her in stages, like a house settling after a long storm. "I'm sorry," she said into his shoulder. "I am so sorry, Thaddeus." "I know," he said. "I know you are." "I didn't know how to do it any other way," she said. "I know that too," he said. "I had a year to figure it out." She pulled back enough to look at his face. "You waited," she said. "You actually waited." "I told you I would," he said. Something moved through her expression that he couldn't entirely name. Disbelief and relief, and something older than both. Something that had been there for a long time and was only now being allowed to be what it was. "I have been told my entire life that what men say and what men do are two different territories," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm aware of the reputation." "You're not like that," she said, and it was not a compliment in the way compliments are usually offered. It was more like a conclusion drawn from evidence, a diagnosis delivered with the same weight she gave all her diagnoses. "No," he said. "I'm not." They had supper in the hotel dining room that evening, the two of them at a corner table with a candle between them. And they talked for 4 hours the way people talk when they have a year of things to cover. And the relief of being in the same room again makes everything feel simultaneously urgent and unhurried. She told him everything she had not been able to write in the letter. About Cincinnati, about the specific ugliness of what Corbin Ferris had tried to do from his deathbed, about the months of sitting in meetings and presenting evidence, and defending her character to men who had never treated her as fully worthy of having one. About the night she had sat in a locked room in a Cincinnati boarding house and cried for 2 hours out of pure exhaustion, and then gotten up and washed her face and gone back the next day. He told her about the notches in the chair. She listened to this with her elbows on the table and her chin in her hands and an expression that was complicated in the way only real things are. "Every day," she said. "Every day," he said. "Thaddeus," she said, and then she stopped, and she shook her head slightly. "You are going to tell me again that you're sorry," he said. "I am," she said. "Don't," he said. "You've apologized, I've heard it, I accept it, that's done. What I want to talk about now is what comes next." She looked at him. "The position in Cincinnati," she said. "I need you to understand it genuinely, because I respect you too much to minimize it. It's at one of the best hospitals in the country. They're doing surgical work that is changing what medicine can do. It's the kind of opportunity that doesn't exist anywhere else." "I understand that," he said. "And Calhoun Creek," she said. "Your ranch, your land, everything you built." "I understand that too," he said. "These things are not compatible," she said. "And I won't ask you to leave your ranch, Thaddeus. I know what it cost you. I know what it is to you." "You're not asking me anything," he said. "I'm telling you something. I built that ranch with 400 borrowed dollars and 7 years of work. It's mine. I'm proud of it, and none of it matters to me the way you do." She opened her mouth. "Let me finish," he said. "I'm not saying I would sell it or abandon it or any dramatic thing like that. I'm saying that whatever problem we are facing, it is a problem that two people face together, and there are solutions to it that are not either or. That is what I want to tell you." She was quiet, looking at him, the candle between them throwing light across her face. "What kind of solutions?" she asked. "The hospital in Cincinnati," he said. "How long is the position?" "They offered it initially for 2 years," she said. "Experimental surgical research. After that it would be a longer-term appointment if I chose." "2 years," he said. "2 years," she confirmed. "I have a foreman who has been with me for 7 years," he said. "Ezra. He knows that ranch better than anyone. I have trusted him with it every time I've left for any length of time, and it has never once suffered for it." She looked at him very carefully. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I have not worked my whole adult life to build something that would fall over the moment I turned my back," he said. "A well-run operation runs. That's what makes it well-run. Ezra can manage the day-to-day. I would need to come back seasonally for roundup for major decisions." "You would come to Cincinnati," she said very carefully. "You would come back to Texas," he said. "Seasonally. And in 2 years we reassess." She was silent for a long time. The dining room had mostly emptied around them. The candle had burned lower. "You would really do that," she said. It was not quite a question. "Adelaide," he said. "I sat on a porch for a year waiting for you. What exactly do you think I wouldn't do?" She laughed, sudden and involuntary and full, the way she had laughed that night in his kitchen in November, the sound of something genuinely free. It dissolved something between them, and they were both smiling at each other across the candle in the nearly empty dining room of the Hartwell Hotel in Laredo, Texas. "There is one other thing," she said when the laughter settled. "Tell me," he said. "I'm not going to give up being who I am," she said. "Even for you, especially for you, I will not be only someone's wife. "I know," he said. "I need to hear that you understand it, not just tolerate it, understand it." "Adelaide," he said, "the reason I love you is because of who you are. If you gave that up, there would be nothing to love. I'm not interested in a woman who makes herself smaller to fit what someone else needs. I am specifically, deliberately, unreservedly interested in exactly the person who is sitting across this table from me right now." She looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were bright in the candlelight, and not from tears exactly, more from the kind of intensity that comes when something you have protected very carefully for a very long time is finally allowed to breathe. "Ask me something," she said. He understood immediately. He reached across the table and took her hand. "Adelaide Monroe," he said, "will you marry me?" It was not quite a question either, the way he said it. It was the kind of statement that has been true for some time and is only now being named. "Yes," she said, "I will." They married in Calhoun Creek in April of 1880, in a small ceremony at the church that was attended by everyone in town, because Adelaide had been their doctor for 2 years, and the town felt a proprietary affection toward her that expressed itself in universal attendance at significant events in her life. Mrs. Calloway cried. Ezra wore a clean shirt and looked uncomfortable in it, but stayed for the entire reception, which Thaddeus noticed and appreciated. Adelaide wore a dress she had made herself in the month before the wedding, a soft cream-colored wool that was practical and beautiful in equal measure, which was exactly Adelaide in a dress. Thaddeus wore his good suit and shined his boots and stood at the front of the church and watched her walk up the aisle, and felt something settle in him with a finality that was nothing like defeat and everything like arrival. The words of the ceremony were the standard words of the time and place, the minister reading from the Book of Common Prayer, and when he reached the part about the husband promising to honor and cherish, Thaddeus said it with a directness and steadiness that caused the minister, later, telling his wife about the ceremony, to note that he had never heard a man say those words the way that Cattleman said them. Like he had thought carefully about every single one. Adelaide, for her part, said her words with the same clear, unhesitating directness she brought to everything, looking Thaddeus directly in the eyes with her gray-green gaze, and the effect of it was that every person in the church felt as though they were witnessing something true, rather than performed. They had a week together on the ranch before she had to go back to Cincinnati to complete the transition. He drove her to the San Antonio depot himself. They stood on the platform in the early morning, and he held her for a long time before the train came. 2 years, she said into his chest. 2 years, he said, and then we reassess, she said, and then we reassess, he agreed. I'll write every week, she said. So will I, he said, and I'll come in the fall, September. September, she confirmed. The train came. She picked up her bags and turned to the steps, and then turned back once more and looked at him with an expression he had never seen from her before. Something open and unguarded and quietly luminous, the face of a person who has finally found the place where they can put down what they've been carrying. Don't carve any more notches in the chair, she said. I won't have to, he said. She boarded the train. He stood on the platform until it was out of sight, and then he walked back to his horse and rode home to the ranch, and the wide porch, and the rocking chair with 365 notches in its arm. He put the pocket knife away. The 2 years in Cincinnati were not simple, but they were good in the way that difficult things can be good when the foundation beneath them is solid. Thaddeus rode the ranch through spring and summer, and took the train to Cincinnati every September. Adelaide came back to Texas for Christmas, and for the summer roundup season, which she had insisted on because she wanted to stay connected to the life there, to the land, to Ezra and the hands who had become familiar faces, to the patients in Calhoun Creek who still asked after her. She was doing extraordinary work in Cincinnati. Her surgical research was being published in medical journals and cited in ways that were changing practice at other institutions. She wrote him detailed letters about it, the science and the breakthrough and the frustration and the small victories, and he read them carefully and asked real questions in his replies. And she told him more than once that the fact that he asked real questions rather than offering generic encouragement was the thing that kept her from feeling isolated in the work. He told her about the ranch with equal detail, about the calving season and the fence repairs, and the drought that came one summer and how they managed it, about a negotiation with the county water authority that required the kind of political navigation he was not naturally inclined toward but which he handled with a thoroughness that yielded good results, about the decision to take on a third hand and who he had chosen and why. They were, in their letters, extraordinarily intimate in a way that surprised him, because he had not expected that writing to a person would function the same way as being with them. But there was something about the letters, the unhurried attention required to write, and the private, serious nature of what passed between them, that deepened something that was already deep. When he came to Cincinnati in September of the first year, they had 10 days together in the city, which was more than he had seen since they had parted. He met her colleagues, including Alina Hatch, who turned out to be a forthright woman of about 40 with a dry wit that he appreciated immediately. Alina shook his hand at the hospital dinner table and said, "So you're the one she went back to Texas for?" "I hope so," he said. "She nearly turned down the Cincinnati position 3 different times," Alina said. "Did she tell you that?" "She did not," he said. Alina raised her eyebrows slightly. "She might have mentioned it at some point." She turned it down 3 times over the course of a summer, and then accepted it in October. The deciding factor, from what I gathered, was that she had finally settled something personal to her satisfaction. He thought about October. He had been in his rocking chair in October, day 232 of the count, watching the road, and apparently in a hotel room in Lerdo she had been deciding to come back toward him. "She's remarkable," he said to Alina. "She is," Alina agreed, "and she seems remarkably happy." For Adelaide, which is a specific category. He saw what Alina meant. There was something in Adelaide in Cincinnati, once the professional stress of the work was accounted for, that was different from the careful self-containment of the woman in Calhoun Creek. She had space here to be entirely herself in a professional setting, to be seen fully as a physician and a researcher without having to constantly establish her right to be taken seriously. She walked into rooms at that hospital, and people looked up with respect and attention. The injustice of what it had cost her to get to that point was not lost on him. The years of fighting for recognition that any man of equivalent skill would have received as a matter of course. But the fact of the respect, hard won as it was real and good, and he was glad for it. And she was glad to be with him. That was visible in a different way, more private, the specific joy of a person who is being fully known by another person, not just the professional self but the whole person. The one who was tired in the evenings and who talked about her father sometimes late at night, and who occasionally woke in the early morning and lay very still with the particular weight of someone carrying things. He lay beside her in the early mornings and held her when she wanted to be held and stayed quiet when she needed the quiet and talked with her when she needed to talk. And he recognized this as the specific labor of love, not the dramatic or the heroic kind, but the daily, patient, sustaining kind that is both simpler and harder than its reputation. In the 2nd September, he came to Cincinnati with news. He had received an offer on the northern section of his land from a Texas Pacific Railroad agent who wanted to run a spur line through. He had negotiated the offer up considerably and was prepared to accept it, which would give him enough capital to make a significant expansion on the rest of the property and to fund a certain additional thing he had been considering. The certain additional thing was that he had spoken with a physician in San Antonio about the possibility of establishing a small clinic in Calhoun Creek. A proper one, with a real surgery room and equipment, and a salary position that would attract a qualified person. He had the money if he sold the railroad land. Adelaide read his letter about this sitting in her office at the Cincinnati hospital, and then she put the letter down and sat for a moment, and then she picked it up and read it again. Then she went to Aliner's office and showed it to her. Aliner read it and said, "This man built you a clinic." "He's building Calhoun Creek a clinic," Adelaide said. "For whom specifically do you think?" Aliner said. Adelaide looked at her for a moment. Then she sat down in Aliner's guest chair and pressed her hands over her eyes, and Aliner, who had known her for 2 years and understood the geography of her emotional landscape, let her sit there for a moment without saying anything. "It's time," Adelaide said from behind her hands. "Is it?" Aliner said carefully. "The research program is largely done," Adelaide said. "The paper is written. The 2 years are up in March. I said I would reassess." "And you have reassessed," Aliner said. "He built me a clinic," Adelaide said, and she lowered her hands. And Aliner had never in 2 years seen Adelaide Monroe look quite the way she looked in that moment, which was the way a person looks when they have found the full shape of what they want and are no longer pretending it's not the shape they've wanted all along. "Go home," Aliner said. Adelaide came back to Calhoun Creek in March of 1882, which was 2 years and 4 months after she had left on that cold February morning without saying goodbye. She came on the train to San Antonio, and Thaddeus met her at the depot and drove her back to the ranch in the wagon with her 3 large trunks of books and equipment and the 1 smaller trunk of personal things. It was late afternoon when they came up the road to the ranch, the one that ran straight and dusty through the scrub, and the house came into view with the wide porch facing west, and the sun was going down behind the cottonwood grove and turning everything that deep violet orange that Texas does better than anywhere else. She looked at the house for a long moment as the wagon slowed. "You kept the porch," she said. "Why wouldn't I?" he said. "I wasn't sure you might not have added to the house or changed things," she said. "I changed some things," he said. "Come inside and you'll see." What he had changed was the back room, the one that had been a general storage space, which he had converted into a study. He had put in a desk and shelves, floor to ceiling, and the shelves were built solidly enough to hold a significant weight of books. There was a window facing east for morning light. She stood in the doorway of that room for a long time without saying anything. "Thaddeus," she said finally, "you need a space that is yours," he said. "Not the clinic, not the kitchen. Yours." She turned around and looked at him. Her eyes were bright, and she was not going to cry. She was not the kind of person who cried easily, but whatever was happening behind her face was significant and serious, and she let him see it. "I don't know what I did," she said, "to be the person that someone like you chose to wait for." "You were yourself," he said, "completely without apology at considerable personal cost. That's what you did." She crossed the space between them and put her hands on either side of his face and kissed him with an intention and specificity that made the porch and the notched chair and the entire long year feel not like a wound but like a foundation. The thing they had built on, without knowing they were building. The clinic opened in September of 1882. It was a proper building on the main street of Calhoun Creek. 2 rooms, a real surgical space, good equipment, and Adelaide Monroe Orrin as its attending physician, with a young assistant she had trained herself, a steady-natured young man named Perry who had come from Austin with some medical schooling and a willingness to learn the rest. The town turned out for the opening in full, the same way they had for the wedding, with the proprietary affection of people who feel that something good has been built among them and that they are in some sense part of it. Ezra was there, wearing the same clean shirt from the wedding. Mrs. Calloway was there, and she cried again, which seemed to be her primary form of expressing happiness at significant events. Adelaide spoke briefly and practically about what the clinic would offer and what its hours would be, and what kinds of cases she could handle, and what kinds would require referral to San Antonio. She spoke the way she always spoke, clearly and without unnecessary ornamentation. But when she finished, she turned to look at Thaddeus, standing at the edge of the small crowd, and she said something that she had not included in her prepared remarks. She said, "I want to say thank you to this town for being the kind of place a person can build something real in. And I want to say that the most important thing I have built here has nothing to do with medicine." Thaddeus looked at her across the crowd and said nothing, because there was nothing to add. In the spring of 1883, Adelaide told him, one morning over breakfast, that she was pregnant. He put down his coffee cup. He looked at her. She had the same expression she always had when delivering significant information, direct and alert, but underneath it there was something else, something he recognized as the specific vulnerability of sharing something that matters enormously. "Are you frightened?" he asked. "Moderately," she said. "You?" "Moderately," he said. "Is that the right response?" "I think so," she said. "I think people who aren't moderately frightened at this news are either not paying attention or are overconfident in a way that the situation doesn't warrant." He came around the table and pulled her up from her chair and held her the way he had held her in the lobby of the Hartwell Hotel, firmly and completely, and she held on to him and he felt her breathe. "We'll be good at it," he said. "Between us, we have most of what it requires. Between us, we have stubbornness, intelligence, and a commitment to honesty that is occasionally uncomfortable for people around us," she said into his shoulder. "That's most of what parenting requires," he said, "from what I can observe." She laughed, that free and unguarded laugh, and he felt it move through him like a current. Their son was born in December of 1883, a healthy, loud, determined boy whom they named James after Adelaide's father, with the middle name Cord after Thaddeus's uncle. James Cord Orrin came into the world at the clinic, with Perry assisting and Ezra waiting in the front room with his hat in his hands, with an anxiety that he later denied entirely. Thaddeus was in the room when James arrived, which was not the standard arrangement and which Perry had raised a cautious eyebrow at, but which Adelaide had insisted on, because she was a physician, and she knew exactly what was happening, and she was not going to manage it alone out of some notion of propriety. He held his son for the first time with a steadiness that surprised him, because he had expected to feel unsteady, and instead he felt the same thing he had felt when he first kissed Adelaide on the porch, a sense of arrival, of the shape of things becoming clear. James was a quiet baby in the early weeks, and then became extremely loud and opinionated, a combination that both his parents found, privately, deeply satisfying. He had Thaddeus's dark hair and Adelaide's gray-green eyes, and a temperament that seemed to be entirely his own, a kind of cheerful ferocity that made everyone who met him feel that something interesting was going to happen. Adelaide went back to the clinic 6 weeks after James was born, with a schedule she had reorganized thoughtfully, and with Perry handling the cases she wasn't there for. Thaddeus rearranged his mornings so that he was at the house with James until Adelaide came home at midday, and in the afternoons she was home and he went to the ranch work. It required negotiation and adjustment, and there were days when it was hard, genuinely hard, the way life is when you are doing more than one real thing at once. But it worked. It worked the way their letters had worked, the way the ranch worked, the way the clinic worked, through deliberate attention and the steady, patient labor of two people who had both decided to be fully present to what they were building. In 1885, Adelaide published a paper in a Philadelphia medical journal that was cited within 6 months in 4 other publications, and referenced in a Congressional Health Committee report, which was not something that happened to papers written by physicians in small Texas towns as a general rule. Thaddeus read the paper 3 times. He asked her 4 questions about it over the course of a week. She answered them with the enthusiastic precision of someone who is rarely asked real questions, and he listened to all of it. In 1886, they had their second child, a girl this time, born in the same clinic in March, a smaller, quieter baby than James had been, with a watchfulness in her eyes from very early on that Adelaide said reminded her of what she'd been told she'd been like as an infant. They named her Frances Ruth. Frances for no particular reason except that they both liked it, and Ruth for Thaddeus's mother, who had died when he was 15. James, who was 2, received Frances with a combination of suspicion and interest that gradually tipped toward the latter. He sat beside her and looked at her with the earnest, concentrated attention of a small person encountering something genuinely new, and Adelaide, watching him, said quietly to Thaddeus, "He's going to be all right." "He's going to be exceptional," Thaddeus said. "That's probably a dangerous thing to say," Adelaide said. "Probably," he agreed. "I said it anyway." By 1887 the ranch had expanded again, the railroad sale money having been well invested, and the Orrin cattle operation was one of the more respected in that part of Texas. Harlan Webb, who had wanted the business partnership years before, had long since stopped asking and had settled instead into a kind of neighboring respect that expressed itself in occasional sharing of resources during hard times, which was more useful than any formal partnership would have been. Ezra had married a woman from Gonzales named Vera, who had opinions on everything and expressed them freely, and Thaddeus found her deeply enjoyable company. They had 2 children and occupied the foreman's house that Thaddeus had added to the property, and the arrangement worked with the ease of people who understand each other's purpose. The porch remained. Adelaide sat on it with Thaddeus on summer evenings after the children were in bed, the way he had imagined someone sitting on it when he built it wide, back when he didn't yet know who the someone was. James came to the porch sometimes in his small pajamas claiming he couldn't sleep, which was never true but which they never challenged because he would sit between them and listen to the nighthawks and eventually become genuinely sleepy and be carried back to bed. Frances, who was more self-contained, slept soundly and did not seek the porch, but she had a habit of appearing in the kitchen at dawn, long before anyone else was up, and sitting at the table with a particular expression that was entirely Adelaide's, the look of someone already thinking about something interesting. One evening in the late summer of 1888, sitting on the porch in the warm dark, Adelaide picked up the rocking chair, the old oak one, and turned it in the lamplight to look at the arm. The 365 notches were still there, silvered with age and use, each one a day. She ran her thumb along them slowly, counting without counting. "I think about that year," she said, "more than you'd expect." "Do you?" he said. "I think about what it cost you," she said, "and what it cost me, and whether there was a better way." "Adelaide," he said. "I know," she said. "I know we've resolved it. I know it's behind us." "Then what are you actually thinking about?" he said. She was quiet for a moment, her thumb still on the notches. "I'm thinking that I almost didn't come back," she said. There were moments in Cincinnati where I almost accepted that it was easier to stay there, that it was simpler, that I had already done the difficult thing of leaving, and the even more difficult thing would be to face what I had done and come back and ask for something I wasn't sure I deserved. He was quiet. "And then I think about what would have happened," she said, "if I had made that choice. And I can't construct the picture. I literally cannot construct it, the life without this." She gestured, a small, encompassing gesture, the porch and the dark yard and the sound of the children sleeping inside. "The life without you," she said, more quietly. He took the rocking chair gently from her hands and set it aside and took her hands in his. She looked at him. "The year I waited," he said. "I want you to understand something about it. It was not easy. There were parts of it that were among the harder things I've done, and I've done some hard things. But I never, not one day of it, wished I had made a different choice. Because I knew, every day of that year, that if you came back, the waiting would be the thing that made it real. And if you didn't come back, the waiting would still be the thing that made it real. It would have been the truest thing I'd ever done either way." She looked at him for a long moment. "How do you do that?" she said softly. "Do what?" "Say the exactly right thing," she said. "I don't," he said. "I say what's true. Sometimes those are the same." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat in the warm dark of the Texas evening and listened to the night hawks, and the cattle settling in the far pasture, and the particular silence of a house that is full of sleeping people you love, which is one of the best sounds there is. The rocking chair sat between them, 365 notches in its arm, silver in the lamplight. No more notches needed, no more counting. Just the long, unhurried expanse of a life that had been built the way good things are built, carefully and honestly, and with patience enough to survive what might have broken it. James Cord Orrin grew into a boy who was, as his father had suspected, exceptional, with a rangy intelligence and an interest in everything and the specific combination of his mother's precision, and his father's steadiness that people who knew both parents found striking and unsurprising in equal measure. He was going to do interesting things with that combination. It was visible from the age of 4. Frances Ruth Orrin was quieter than her brother and deeper, the kind of child who watches and processes and arrives at conclusions that adults find disconcerting because they are more accurate than they have any right to be at that age. She was going to do interesting things with that quality too. Adelaide recognized in her the specific kind of intelligence that looks like something other than intelligence, until it suddenly doesn't. And she made certain that Frances was given books and questions, and the clear understanding that her mind was a thing to be used rather than a thing to be apologized for. Adelaide Monroe, Orrin practiced medicine in Calhoun Creek for the rest of her professional life, publishing 8 more papers, training 3 more assistants who went on to their own practices, and building the clinic into a small but genuinely good institution that served the county better than most rural Texas counties were served in that period. The injustice of how much harder every step of that had been because of who she was, what she had faced in Cincinnati, what doors had been closed, and what obstacles had been manufactured, was not something she or Thaddeus ever pretended away. But the work stood, and the work was real, and the lives it touched were real, and those things were what she put her hands on in the evenings when the past tried to make itself bigger than the present. Thaddeus Orrin ran his cattle operation with the same patient, fair-handed competence he had always brought to it, and the land thrived, and the people who worked for him thrived, and he paid fair wages and treated people as though their labor mattered, which it did, and he said so clearly and often, because that was the kind of person he was and had always been. He fixed the rocking chair in 1889 because one of the legs had begun to loosen. He repaired it carefully, re-gluing and clamping and letting it dry for a full day before sitting in it again. He did not touch the arm with its notches. Those he left entirely alone. Adelaide came out onto the porch when he was finishing the repair and sat in the other chair he had added at some point, the match to the first, so that there were two rocking chairs side by side on the wide porch he had built with someone in mind. "You fixed it," she said. "It needed it," he said. "But you kept the notches," she said. "Of course," he said. She looked at the arm of the chair, at those 365 small marks, and then she looked at him. "Good," she said. "We should remember things, the difficult ones especially." "I agree," he said. She reached over without looking away from the road and put her hand over his where it rested on the arm of the chair, the same gesture from that evening years ago in the lamplight of his kitchen, the one that had been the beginning of the real thing between them. He turned his hand under hers and held on. The dust road ran straight and quiet to the horizon. The sun was going down behind the cottonwood grove. The cattle were settling in the far pasture. Inside the house, James and Frances were doing whatever children do in the hour before supper, which generally involved noise of various kinds. And in a little while Adelaide would go in and Thaddeus would bring in wood for the evening fire, and they would eat supper together at the kitchen table and talk about the day's work, his and hers, the practical and the important and the small, all of it together, nothing excluded. That was the life. The whole weight of it, the whole goodness of it, right there on the porch in the last light. He had built the porch wide on purpose. He had been right to.